George, why don't you just introduce yourself and let us know where we're sitting?
Yes, of course. My name is George Smith, and I'm the founder and president of the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts, IDSVA. And I'm also the Edgar E. Coombs Jr. Professor of New Philosophy at IDSVA. And we are sitting in my little writing shed in Brooklin, Maine.
When you said you teach new philosophy, what does that mean?
A highly debatable term. There are people that read my book called The Artist Philosopher and New Philosophy and said, well, anybody that uses, the word new is really getting into this commercial hype of selling a new idea. When in fact, what I mean by new philosophy is the original philosophy that was new in its newness, not like a new car, but like the first car was the new car, the very first car. So there is a philosophy that precedes Western metaphysics that we think of today as philosophy because we're sold on that idea through our educational and cultural experience. But prior to Western metaphysics, and certainly with a lot of modes of thought that still exist in the world today, the artist philosopher was the practitioner of a certain kind of philosophy. If we think of the archaic shaman of 20 and 30,000 years ago, they were poets and scientists. So when I say new philosophy, what I mean is a philosophy that precedes Western metaphysics and also exceeds Western metaphysics. It still goes on today in what we call the artist philosopher. And of course, IDSVA is a school that the mission of which is to nourish and cultivate the life and thinking of the artist philosopher as a way of being in the world that is desperately needed today.
So you had said to me before that this, in some way, the artist philosopher, the role is here to critique or to counterbalance the sort of classical Western philosophical stance, right?
Well, yes and no. What I would say is that Western philosophy itself begins as a challenge of new philosophy. Western philosophy overcomes new philosophy. So prior to Western philosophy, all we had was this way of thinking that I describe as scientific poetic thinking, or the thinking of the artist philosopher. And, in Athens around 600 BC, these people came together and said, we need to get rid of, the mythological aspect of the way we think and just strip it down to pure scientific logic. And then we can win wars and build cities in a way that is highly efficient and very successful. And you know what? They were right. And that's exactly what they did. But they overcame a way of thinking that I begin to realize, and a lot of other people realize, that is a seriously missing element in human consciousness today that prevents us from entering into a original partnership with nature and positions us in a relationship of domination over nature that has become not just a relationship, but in fact an abusive relationship. So for me, the idea of the artist philosopher has a lot to do with thinking, has a lot to do with art, with the relationship between art and philosophy, the making of art and the making of philosophy. But it also has to do with our relationship with one another and the world, and how our relationships with each other have become instrumental, that is to say, efficient and proficient, but not necessarily human in the fundamental sense of that word, which to me is a word that is endowed with poetic consciousness as well as logical, scientific, technological thinking.
Which kind of leads to what I feel like is a pillar of IDSVA, that what do you call it, the culture of care?
Certainly the core of IDSVA's concept of a space of learning and thinking and being with one another is what we call the ethos of care. And I use the word ethos there as opposed to ethics, because ethics is conceptual, whereas ethos is a practice. One of the fundamental concepts of all philosophy is that action precedes understanding. That if we want to live in a caring space, then we have to practice care. That we care for the space that we occupy, that we care for the world that we live in, that we care for those that we work with rather than that we work over or under. That all of those things are really important to IDSVA, and part of that care is to do the work so that when it comes time to helping someone else, your colleague or your fellow student, you're prepared to offer help. And that means doing the work.
Yeah. And it is a rigorous program. The work at IDSVA is quite extensive.
I frankly don't know if there's any school that is more rigorous in its curriculum than IDSVA is. We are adamant about the thoroughness of our work, the thoroughness of our study, the rigor with which we go into a question or a problem and formulate this question in such a way that it will emerge with a wider understanding of the question itself, questioning itself, and the relationship between whatever it is that we're trying to think about and its effect on the world and the world's effect on it, historically, scientifically, metaphorically, poetically, artistically, creatively. All of those things, not just one of those things.
And you really believe that there's this element of a call to action, that the world is in dire need of the artist philosopher in the face of the extinction of our species, right?
Well, I'm not going to say that the artist philosopher is going to save the world. What I am going to say is that the world is on the edge of extinction because of the absence of the artist philosopher. I do believe that. I do believe that it is the thinking of scientific, technological consciousness that brings us to the place that we're at. That is the absence of poetic consciousness or poetic thinking. Let's remember what the word poetic means. Let's remember that the word poetic is always grounded in the sacred. And when I use the word sacred, I don't mean that in the sense of modern religion. In fact, I mean it in the sense that precedes modern religion, where religion was not a concept per se, but that the sacredness of the poetic word was, in fact, essential to human being.
You were in academia, and you had been in academia. When did you realize that IDSVA was this calling, and how did it come about? There was a space, right, where nothing like this exists in North America, correct? How did it come into being, and how is it unique?
Well, that's a great question. I wish I could answer it in a way that would operate within the confines of the time that we have together. It wasn't until I became the dean of an art school that I discovered my own prejudice against artists. I went to that art school to teach theory, art theory, and I believed in my heart and soul that these people were going to not only dislike what I had to teach, but also that they were not capable so much of learning what I had to teach. And I got into these classes and realized that these artists were quicker and much more nimble and facile at grasping abstract problems in a way that was immediately comprehensible to them and to whomever it was that they were explaining these ideas to. Not only were they able to grasp these ideas, the relationship between Derrida and Lacan and Plato or whatever, but they lived these ideas and they soaked them up. And I began to realize that my whole life had been constituted from a standpoint of a particular prejudice, which was art was less than science. Art was less than philosophy. And in fact, we know today that is a fundamental concept of modern world consciousness. So that began to convince me that we're onto something in terms of how to nourish and cultivate the mind of the artist in terms of what they had been mostly denied during the entire course of their educational history, which was access to philosophical ideas. What we really need to do is to start a program or a space within which artists can come, or artistic creative thinkers can come, and earn a PhD on the basis of an MFA requirement, that not just an MA is required of this philosophical program, but also an MFA is also admissible. So I think we might have been one of the first advanced programs in the study of philosophy in the United States that would admit a student with an MFA instead of an MA in philosophy as a degree requirement.
So you have the idea to form this school, and you're going to accept people with master in fine arts, which traditionally in the U.S. wasn't happening at all.
As far as I know.
What hoops do you have to jump through to get that approved? Is that something that...
Well, let me just say very quickly that everybody that I spoke to about this idea told me that it was absolutely impossible, totally out of the question, that we would never get accreditation. We wouldn't even get as far as applying for accreditation. One of the things that we had to do right away was to get a bill passed through the Maine state legislature and signed into law by the governor of Maine, giving us the legal authority to grant this degree that I was proposing. Well, how do you do that? Well, in fact, I had a lot of help along the way. We took out a full-page ad in Art Forum, international magazine on art and theory and criticism. And Krzysztof Wodzisko, the great Polish-American projection artist, had written me a letter where he had said, in my day, I had to study philosophy all on my own in the solitude of my apartment with no help and no community, so that I could come to the place where I am today in understanding the art form that I practice as a transhistorical critique of human consciousness. And now with IDSVA, people can come together and do this work as a community with one another. And it will not take them 10 years of painful solitude, but in fact, a relatively short time of communal experience. And we copied that section of the letter. We reprinted that in the full-page ad in Art Forum. And with the imprimatur of a world-famous artist-philosopher behind us, we were able to attract our first entering class of, I think, 12 students. But anyhow, IDSVA is a bit of a miracle. All of the advisors that I went to, legal advisors and so forth and so on, said, don't do this. This is an impossible dream. You're going to waste your time. You're going to waste your energy. You're going to come to disappointment, because nobody can just simply start a school, especially with no money. The reason I think that IDSVA came into being in the terms that it is today is because history had been awaiting its arrival. Its time was there. And even in the face of all of the impossibilities that we had to work through, one time after another, it would not only survive, but in fact prevail. right now we're in a place where, and we have been for quite some time, where we enjoy international respect and admiration within the world of academic study and artistic practice. But we also enjoy a world-class faculty, incredible staff of dedicated and highly talented, skilled leaders. And we have attracted students that are themselves extraordinary human beings that, for one reason or another, would come to a school like this and put their heads to such an incredibly demanding and, in fact, many times, oftentimes exhausting program, and come out on the other end as contributors to the common weal of their given field of study. I want to mention, as far as that goes, that I'm not just making this up. I think our students per capita publish with major publishers, academic publishers, more dissertations than maybe any advanced PhD program in the humanities of the United States. It's just amazing, and the jobs that they're getting are really impressive. I have to say that I'm very proud of them, but I also know that they come away from IDSVA with a certain aspiration toward bringing their practice as artist philosophers to a change in the world, primarily through how we do education in the world. I so feel that one of the things that we haven't touched on is the problem of arrogance in the world today. And I believe that arrogance is inherent to logical thinking. That, in fact, logical thinking is so effective that it's hard not to say, as Pericles did, I built the Acropolis. He was one of the first great metaphysicians prior to the official advent of metaphysics through Socrates, who was younger than Pericles. But before Pericles built the Acropolis, the people who built Delphi, the temples at Delphi, were just carpenters that worked together, and they considered the soil that they were making the bricks out of as sacred, and the brick-making skill that they had as sacred. They were gifts that were given to them, and they were tremendously grateful for those gifts, and they expressed that gratitude in the temples that they built. And the gods that spoke from those oracles were revered for a wisdom that was not possessed in human beings and had to be interpreted from these oracles. Whereas today, as it was back in the time of Pericles, or even starting with Pericles, all of the accomplishments that we see in the world today, whether it's great skyscrapers or incredible nuclear submarines, are things that are made by humans that we claim credit for, rather than things that come to us as gifts. And because we lack that gratitude and grace that was so essential to the poetic sacred word that I was speaking about when we began this conversation, our arrogance convinces us that we can do anything, and that we can, in fact, not see the nature that we live in as a gift that comes from the sacred poetic expression of a certain spirit that is cosmic and not human. That we can, claiming that prowess and that power, do whatever we want with nature. And in fact, nature is speaking back to us and saying, "You have done enough."
Can you talk to me a little bit about those early days of IDSVA and those first students, and how, they were kind of going on this bold new journey with you, and how that excitement and newness sort of paved the way? Tell me a little bit about the relationships that developed, and how those relationships related to the places and the IDSVA expanding and growing.
Yeah. Well, we make a joke that we take our students to Spinocchio Castle first because it has a 3-mile driveway and you can't run away. Because when you get there, it's a 2-week intensive, what the students call boot camp in theory and philosophy. It's also a place where students bond because they have to work together if they're going to make it. And collaboration is everything at IDSVA, and it begins there. You have to ask for help. And when you ask for help, guess what? You have to say thank you. You have to come into the relationship with a certain measure of gratitude, and you have to give back by helping the next person that comes along. But in those early years, the students that we had coming to us were very special people. They were pioneers that were daring to do something that had never been done before. They had no idea where this degree was going to take them. And they were not desperados by any stretch. Many of them were themselves established faculty members and studio practice MFA and BFA programs around the United States. Amazing people. And many of those people, in fact, I would say almost all of those people are still in our lives today. Just incredible people. To give you one example of how these things went early on, which I think was convincing for students coming behind them, we had this one guy who was from Brazil, Neil Santana, I'll say his name, I just love this guy, who came in as an adjunct professor at a university in Texas. And his professorship was in photography. Great guy. And he did a lot of photography around Spinocchio that actually get out around the world. So people say, oh man, I think I'd like to go there. But anyhow, Neil stuck in and did this degree, wrote a dissertation with me on Heidegger, in fact, in technology. And once he got through, halfway through the program, his dean at the university said, this whatever you're doing at this place called IDSVA, it's really changing the way you're teaching, and your students are coming in and raving about your classes. I'd like to help pay for your tuition. So I think the last year or year and a half, that last 6 semesters or so, the school paid this guy's tuition. And then when he passed his dissertation defense, he was immediately promoted to associate professor at this, from an adjunct to our associate professor and director of international studies for this school. So of course that was incredibly affirming, but I'm not going to say that was the only case, because it hardly was. There were so many other students that were going off and doing these amazing things as a result of the experience that they had at IDSVA that allowed them to persuade search committees that this was the kind of voice that they wanted at the table at their institution. And still today, that is the case. It's really quite wonderful. So those early days were scary. They were adventurous. They were the unfolding of the absolute unknown. And for me to suggest that I was doing this all by myself, and I hope I'm not, would be such a specious affront to all of those who stepped forward and helped us right away. Major players, Charlie Altieri, one of the great critics of the relationship between art and literature, who was teaching at Berkeley and the chair of their visual arts program, stepped right up and came to Spinocchio and lectured. David Driscoll, serving one of the world's greatest historians of African-American art and himself a leading African-American artist and world figure, was there from the very beginning. And out of that, we established the David Driscoll Fellowship with the understanding that David and I shared, that we knew that IDSVA students were going to go on to assume leadership roles in the world with their degree, with their experience. And we wanted to make sure that people of color were right in there, in the mix. Not on the margins, not one or two, but really in the mix. And David did everything he could to help me advance that cause. And the result was that we attracted a lot of African-American students, a lot of Cuban students, Puerto Rican students. And today, I think that our diversity rate, if I can use that really ugly term, is somewhere around 37%, which I'm going to guess is higher than any other advanced PhD program in the United States. We have an incredible mix of students. And along with that, I want to say that out of those early students, we had a lot of, because we were bringing in these amazing students from all walks of life and all different practices, an urgent need to see more in the curriculum that was about their thinking, their customs, their culture. And I would push back and say, look, our focus here is the critique of Western metaphysics. So the way to critique Western metaphysics is to study it, to know it, to understand it. So all of the early curriculum was just Western metaphysics, and then post-structuralism as sort of a critique of that. But it was generally a white man's curriculum. And from the conversations that I was having with our students, and that we were having with our students, that we were having together, not as a battle, but as, okay, what do we want to do here? We now have a much more diversified curriculum, as well as a very diverse student population and a more and more diverse faculty. We've been very blessed with incredibly gifted, unusually talented individuals who want to come and work with students, for the students and not for themselves. I dare not name any names, because to do that I might leave others out, but many of these people are historic figures. And what I find is that the people come into that dimension of life because they are so generous of spirit, because they are so still, even in their late careers, filled with wonderment as to what the next generation might bring to the world. We've had just such incredible luck with people like that kind of swimming into our ken for no particular reason, and then contributing in such a way that they leave an indelible trace of their example on the institution as a whole, not only in terms of its present, but also its future.
I guess what I wanted to hit on is that I found so unique was just that you're walking in these places, and there seems this real open-eyed interest and excitement about the ancient history and the established thinkers. But then there was also really fascinating experiences along the way of newness. Just the human element I'm talking about too is just the students really all having this intensive time together and spending time together, and even just the conversations at coffee shops or in the bus on the way, from historical site to like a really modern, all female art exhibit,
And to me, what you're really describing is this stepping away from the hierarchical structure of typical educational experience, this old and therefore to be revered, and this new and to be suspected or dismissed. And I think that goes for everything that we do, that the literatures that we study, the philosophies that we study, the artists that we study, the customs and traditions that we try to grasp, that all of those things have to be understood in dialogue with one another, just as we're in dialogue with one another as we're trying to let knowledge unfold in our presence as something other than a scientific fact, but something that is deeply imbued with meaning.
I've had the pleasure of speaking with a number of students from various cohorts, and one of the things that was a through line was this sense of excitement. And they were going back to various places, some to academia, some to galleries, some to administrative positions, some to their personal practices. But there was an overarching sense from the students of IDSVA that they were part of a community of change, and a community that was going to go out and do things, in the world of philosophy, in the world of art, in the world of academia. And they were going to be part of something that wasn't selfish, but that was important. That was important. And I think there was a sense of feeling honor or like joy in being a part of IDSVA. And I want you to talk a little bit about those students and how you've helped engender that feeling. They don't all go to the same place. They're all working in the same fields, but they're all working as agents of change.
Yeah, well said. I think you said it all. I don't know if I could add anything. A couple of things there. One is that, when you do a PhD in physics, as an example, there are all kinds of different fields of physics, but basically everybody comes from a background in the study of physics. And everybody is there to study physics. So there's a certain uniformity or monological density to the conversation that a physics PhD candidate will participate in during the course of his or her educational experience. What happens to IDSVA is people are coming from all over the place, and many people are just coming from off the wall in a very intelligent, creative way. So you wind up with 15 or 18 students in a cohort that bring in this polyphonic dialogical intensity. So they come together from these different perspectives and these different walks of life and these different colors and languages, and bringing it forward not just by participating in the continual unfolding of IDSVA. Because IDSVA, by the way, is not trying to recuperate and preserve and conserve and control an established tradition, but invent a world of tomorrow that will bring our experience to a more fulfilling understanding of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a tree, what it means to be a rabbit, and how all of these things are meaningful to a biosphere that depends upon all of these meanings as not just scientific facts, but meaningful representation of the poetic word.
So you've talked about how rigorous and incredibly thorough, the program is and serious, but I mean, these students are allowed to basically go way out to wherever they want to go with their theses. Maybe not wherever they want to go, but they're pulling from very disparate places.
Yeah, what I would say there is, of course, you're right about that. IDSVA has a certain elasticity that allows it to go anywhere in the world. We're in a position where our students really can go in all these different directions, but then when they come together with one another, the range of possibility that comes out of those dialogical encounters with culture, with the present, with the ancient past, with the concept of a possible future that we have yet to imagine. I think to a certain kind of scientist, this would sound totally irregular and absolutely irresponsible. But our job, and I think we forget this in philosophy, the job of the philosopher is not to elaborate and explicate the fact of the matter or even the possible, but to imagine the impossible. And if there were ever a time in human experience where we needed to imagine the impossible, it is now. And what I would say is that the rigor is really a part of this. It's not just a matter of coming up with these highfalutin ideas and letting anything go in any direction. It is to say, okay, what is the foundation upon which you are going to predicate this argument? And what will be the consequence of a successful argument? Will it, in fact, make a substantial contribution to the common weal of your field and to humanity as a whole? Now, that's not to say that you have to prove that dead right to begin with, but you better be on good ground if you want us to go and find a world leader to direct that dissertation.
Interview after interview, and the students bring up George Smith, the founder of IDSVA, and how he would reach out, maybe on a Sunday, and call them, and ask them how they were doing, how their studies are going, but how George Smith cares and how he really knows the students. And you'd ask about their family, or like you personally each student. So for you, what is it like stepping back and sort of passing the torch and sort of stepping away? Are you going to still have the day-to-day connection and stepping away from running the school? So how is that for you?
Well, that's a great question, and I compliment you on the perspicuity of your insights all the way through this conversation. But first of all, I would correct you by saying I don't run the school. I don't run the school. In fact, the school might be something of an anarchy. Right? The school runs itself together. The school runs itself together. We all care. And we all listen to one another. I get uncomfortable, and I correct students all the time who say to me, "Oh, you know, as founder of IDSVA, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that?" And what I say is, IDSVA is founded every day, and we together found IDSVA. IDSVA is not the founding of one person. It is the emergence of a historical necessity that has been facilitated by many, many, many people. More importantly than any of those people are students. And they are the inventors and the founders of IDSVA on a daily basis. So I don't say I'm stepping down from the presidency. I say I step aside from the presidency. And, you know, I'll go back on to the faculty in a limited way, at least. But I so feel as though it is absolutely crucial that I step down at this time. Not because I'm tired, not because I'm feeble, not because I'm bored of my job. I think I have the best job ever. The reason why it's so important for me to step down now is because IDSVA is strong right now. I am strong right now. I can still work the 60, 70, 80-hour a week job that entails a lot of what needs to be done, a lot of which is trying to figure out what the hell these books are saying. But, you know, if we waited too long and I was, you know, struck by an illness or other problems, it would be very hard to bring in new leadership that would want to be on a team of a kind that we have created, because the team that we have created is the one that we have now, for sure. So for me, this is the right time. What that means is that in stepping aside, IDSVA will come into the full fruition of its institutional development. When you have a founder, you know, leading an institution, the question is always going to be in the back of minds, especially the minds of philanthropic investors, as to whether or not this institution can fly on its own wings, or if it's just, you know, a concoction of one zealot that is able to push it through on a day-to-day basis. We know that IDSVA is an institution that does fly on its own wings, that the president is one voice among many, many other voices of equal value and importance. But that's not to say that that's the perception that in which IDSVA is held by the world. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the future of IDSVA depends in large part on philanthropic investment, on endowment, so that it can, in fact, live in perpetuity in the terms that it has been established. And that means, you know, getting out of the way so that philanthropic investors can see the fact of them, which is that this is an institution that stands on its own foundation and not on the foundational energy or inspiration of an individual. But I also feel as though our staff, our leadership, our faculty, our students are really ready. They've been preparing for this new role in their professional and personal lives. And they don't want to wait around till I'm 90, because, you know, they'll drift off or lose that inspirational spirit that keeps them going as they do. And they're all so dedicated, and none of them is fully compensated for the gifts that they bring to this program from the place of selfless care. So it's time for them to be recognized as fully prepared to take on this new role, this new dimension, this new institutional perspective, whereby they really are. They always have been, but now are recognized as having their hands on the future of this institution. It's not just the administrators or gifted people or the faculty leadership or the faculty in general. and the visiting faculty, but more than that, the students, they are the vanguard of IDSVA's future.
Is there anything in summation that you'd like to say? Is there anything that you feel like we've missed that you'd like to add?
Only this, that I said a little while ago that I'm the luckiest guy in the world as far as the job that I have, and the reason for that is to come back to the initial purport of this conversation, which is learning. And I honestly have to say that I have been I count my lucky stars every day with how much I have learned at IDSVA, which is one of the things I love about IDSVA. It's not a one-directional learning experience where the professors stand on high or the administration stands on high and says, okay, this is the way you do it. It really is a dialogue. And I have learned so much from our students. I am not the same person I was when IDSVA started. I am certainly not what I would call knowledgeable, but I am certainly a hell of a lot less ignorant than I was when we started. And that comes from the education that I've gotten at IDSVA, and I so treasure that educational experience, and I will carry that on to the end of my days.
Well, thanks for spending the time and inviting me up here. It's really special. I'm so honored to be a part of it.
Yeah, me too. Me too.